Hello everybody and welcome to this SUPboarder review of the Starboard Hypernut. Wow, what an exciting board we have for you today. Now, if you haven't seen the Hypernut before, are you living under a rock? Where have you been? The Hypernut's been around since about 2015, so it has undergone a lot of changes throughout the years, and this is the third generation of Hypernut that we are going to be reviewing for you today. Now, the shape, yes, we're going to get into that a bit later, but I'm going to touch on it now just to introduce you a little bit to the board. Now, that parallel outline along with those inverted rails, what that does just gives you loads of stability and it just means you can ride a more compact shape and a shorter shape as well. So realistically, these boards are all pretty much under 8 feet long, but they still pack a lot of volume so you are able to stay balanced. We've got a whole lot to get through in this review. We are going to be taking a look at the specifications of this board, taking a look at the fittings, the bottom shape, all of the design elements of this board, and then we'll be getting into our thoughts and impressions on how it performed on the water, going through our pros, cons, value for money, and who this board is going to suit. Is it going to suit you? Stick around to the end to find out. But before we do move any further in this review, I really want to highlight that this board we have in front of us here is the 2022 Hypernut in the blue carbon construction. Now for 2023, Starboard have dropped the blue carbon construction and they are only doing the Starlite and the Limited Series construction on the Hypernut. The shape has not changed in the 2023 model, so we are able to bring you the information about the board. However, I will be referring to the different prices and the different weights available in those constructions throughout the video. Now there are 3 different sizes in the Hypernut range. We have the 7.2 by 28, which is in front of us here. We have the 7.4 by 30 inches wide, and we also have the 8 foot by 31.5 inches. So let's jump into the specifications of this board. This Hypernut is 7 feet 2 inches long, it is 28 inches wide and 4.2 inches thick, and it comes in at a total of 114 liters. Now the weight on the 2022 Hypernut in the blue carbon is 7.4 kilograms, but it does go up to 7.5 kilograms for the Limited Series or 8.1 kilograms for the Starlite. The tail width on the Hypernut is 19.8 inches wide, and the board comes standard with a quad fin setup. Now the recommended retail price on the blue carbon 2022 is 1,799 British pounds, but we will take a look at the 2023 constructions as well. So in the Starlite construction, we are looking at a price of 1,399 British pounds or 1,699 US dollars. And then if we look at the Limited Series construction, it is 1,149 British pounds or 1,449 US dollars. This board is made of the blue carbon construction. It's the lightest and most high performance construction. A full carbon wrap plus twin stringers for reinforcement and pine under the standing area blends performance and durability. But as we have mentioned before, Starboard now have this board in the Limited Series construction, which has the same twin stringer and the pine under the standing area for reinforcement, but it is made with glass instead of carbon. This offers riders a more affordable price point, but does add a little bit of weight to the board. Now the Starlite construction is the same with that twin stringer, but with reinforced glass and a rail band for impact resistance. This board is super strong, but it does add that weight. Now Starboard are a market leader within the stand-up paddleboard industry for both the composite boards and also the inflatable stand-up paddleboards. Starboard really pride themselves on their environmental credibility. They're planting mangroves. The new boards are all 10 times carbon net positive, which is fantastic. They're running cleanups. They have a plastic offset program as well. So when you do buy into the brand Starboard, when you do buy their product, you're really becoming part of that company and part of their ethos, which I think is a fantastic way and direction that Starboard is moving in. So let's get into looking at the fittings that we find on the board and also the shape of that board. Starboard have kept it pretty simple with a diamond groove deck pad as standard on the blue carbon. This deck pad leads back to a tail pad that has a ridge in the middle of it, and that is for comfort and grip when your foot is back there. Then there's a nice raised kicker at the back of that tail pad, and that's so you can wedge your foot up against it for more critical maneuvers. There is the leashing point behind the tail pad, and then the carry handle in the middle is a very comfortable handle and it is weighted well. There is also an air vent on this blue carbon board. If we flip the board over and have a look at the fin setup, we notice that it comes as a quad fin setup as standard. The Hypernut comes with the bio-resin Armor Core sustainable fins. They are a glass fin and there is a 4.7 inch size side fins in the front quad and 3.7 inch size side fins in the rear quad. Let's get into taking a look at the outline shape of the Hypernut that we've all come to know and love. Yes, it looks just like a table, but a lot of research and development have gone into this design to be able to perform really well out on the waves. The inverted nut rails are the board's secret weapon as you maintain width in the standing area and the nose for stability, which is why you can ride this board so much shorter than your normal surf SUP. So the key to this board performing well is that hip on the outline shape of the board. So you can ride this board shorter, so you're not going to have that swing weight you will have from, say, a longer board, which is why this does have quite a wider nose. It's going to add to that stability. But what it does is it actually pushes the wide point right where you're standing, or even a little bit further back from that handle. Now, this is really key for when the conditions are less than ideal, maybe a little bit choppy, a little bit bumpy, so it does add more stability here to the standing area. Now that hip in the rail, it allows the board to have a bit more of a curvature to the rail as it filters back toward the tail, which means you're going to get a lot more grip when you are surfing a wave. Taking a zoomed in look at the nose shape, Starboard have rounded off the nose, making it slightly narrower than those boards in previous years, which does reduce that swing weight a little bit and makes it easier to turn. The swallowtail at the back of the board allows the board to stay wide in the tail, but offers 2 points of release for that extra bite during rail turns. So taking a look at the deck shape on the Hypernut, it is quite flat where you are standing on the board. It tapers off very slightly toward the rails, and where you'll notice it really tapering off is toward the tail, where Starboard have thinned out the rails back there for that added grip and hold and bite when you are surfing. It's really hard for Starboard to thin out the rails anywhere else because you will lose that volume and that stability. Take a look at the bottom shape on this board, and it is a single concave that does run throughout the whole of the board. You'll notice that there's quite a big single concave up at the nose, and then when you do get throughout the board, it starts to taper off until you get to the channels in the back there. So the channels allow this board to, again, just have that bit more extra grip and hold, and it really directs that water flow right through the middle of the board. You're getting a really fast board down the line as those quad fins are to the side and there's nothing stopping all of that water flowing through the middle. Now the rocker line on the Hypernut is quite flat. There is a little bit of a kick underneath the nose. Starboard have kind of thinned out the nose in this board and lifted up that a little bit, but it's still quite flat on top. What that does is it allows you to get over the white water when paddling out, but also just not tend to nosedive in those critical sections on the wave. So what is it like on the water? Well, first off, let's start talking about stability when paddling out and paddling over waves. It's very, very stable board, and I hardly ever fell off paddling over white water. It was kind of head high when we were paddling out through the waves, but yet this board just seemed to navigate up and over white water effortlessly. It was really great to be able to jump on this board, 7.2, one of the shortest boards that I've ridden, definitely. And yet still it has great stability and some good paddle speed as well. From that flatter rocker, you are feeling like you are on, say, like a 7.8, maybe a bit longer board. And that's what I really like about this, is it paddles well and it's very, very stable in those bumpy and choppy conditions too. Now, it may take a little bit of getting used to for the shortness of the shape as well, for that stability from front to back. Now, I really like that Starboard have kept really wide at the front and back to help with that, but it is noticeable when you do come down from a bigger board that stability from front to back is a little bit compromised on this shorter shape. And that rocker line really helps to paddle into waves. I was catching waves before they were even standing up and getting onto them with ease, which is fantastic from this board. And I think that really comes down to the bottom shape, getting a little bit of lift underneath the nose with that single concave. But also the quad fins make it paddle really, really fast and be able to get into that wave. And then once you do catch the wave, it rockets down the line with those quad fins. Now, what I really liked about this board on the waves was that it just rocketed across flat sections. Literally, you just need to do a few paddles and move your weight with your feet to be able to generate speed on the board, and this would just fly across those flatter sections. I noticed myself making sections that I wouldn't expect to make on, say, a more rocket board or a longer board. And to be fair, this is the second time or third time I've ridden a Hypernut. I'd ridden a bigger size a couple of years back, but to get on a smaller shape such as this one was really, really exciting for me. The way it picked up waves, the way it generated speed off the bottom, the way it came off the top on a few of those turns, it has some great spark to this board. And that's one of the things that I was not expecting to come out of the Hypernut. Maneuvering down the line, you could easily step back on the tail, crank a little snappy turn off the top, but then also do a pretty nice rail carve down the line as well, and then finish it off nicely in the white water. And because you've got that wider outline, it's really stable, so you're going to land the majority of your maneuvers. Now, some of the things that I really had to get used to when riding a board this small and such a different shape to what I'm used to riding is, firstly, I kept wanting to step my back foot over the back of the board. Usually I like to step my back foot up and back, and you should be doing this too when you are SUP surfing. Usually bring it forward on the board to get a bit more speed, and then when you want to do a turn, you step it back onto the tail pad and crank that turn, turning from the tail of the board. What I noticed is, because this board was so short, I felt like I was stepping over the back of that tail pad and my foot was just going off the back of the board. So I had to just change my riding style a little bit more to just to get in tune with the board and how it did feel. And because of that, because I had to bring my feet in maybe a little bit closer together, I noticed that I was doing more snappy turns and tighter turns as well. So I wasn't turning or carving around as much as I usually would be when I do surf. I had to change that style. I had to do those tight, snappy turns off the top and those cutbacks as well. You really had to kind of cut your turns short, only because this board turns really fast and you're probably getting a lot more rotation and movement in compared to a longer board or a board that's got a little bit more of a rail line. However, after a few waves and you're getting used to it, this board just, it's so much fun. I didn't realize how much fun I would have on this board, and that is really the key thing for me throughout this whole review, is just how much fun I had riding it. And that is great. If you want a board that's going to give you fun every time you go out there on the water, get yourself a Hypernut. I do definitely recommend it for those kind of less than ideal condition days. Now, taking a look at what might be some of the cons to the Hypernut board, to be completely honest with you, I don't think there are any highlight or standout cons. The only thing I would say is that it does take a little bit of time to get used to riding this board. It is a very different style to the traditional surfboard outline, where you kind of have a pointy nose, pulled in tail, and that width in the middle for that stability. You need to surf this very, very differently, and because of that, I feel like that you won't be progressing your surfing a whole lot. If you do have a bit of a longer board with that traditional rail outline, you're able to carve and learn how to use the rail of the board. With this, you can surf it quite flat, slide the tail, do some snappy turns in the pocket. Super fun, amazing board. But to be able to improve your surfing, maybe get in a bit more waves of consequence, bigger waves, steeper waves, you will need to have another board in your quiver, and that will be that more traditional outline, which does open up your progression in SUP surfing, because you're able to draw different lines, go up more vertical in the lip, you are able to carve right back around, and you can do all of that with speed as well. But there is a lot of things to learn on those boards, where with this one, it's just all about fun. The fun factor is super high, 10 out of 10. I would give it for the Hypernut because of that stability, because of the speed, because you do have maneuverability off the tail. But just working out how it's going to be surfed, I know that Lucy was out there on the Hypernut as well, and she's just struggled a little bit to go from a more traditional board. She was on the Starboard Spice. Moving on to the Hypernut was a bit of a jump for her, and also for me when I was changing up boards as well, moving from the Spice to this Hypernut. just because you do have to get into a different mindset. So no cons to mention, but just considerations to take into account before you go out for a session or before you purchase the Hypernut. So let's move into the value for money on this board, and because the fun factor is high, I'm going to give it some good value for money. Now, if you have the money to spend on the Hypernut board, go for it. Do buy one in your quiver. Use it for those kind of junky days. Maybe the surf's maximum head height. You probably could take it out a little bit bigger if you wanted to, but that really going to be ideal in that waist to shoulder high range. Maybe a slight bump on the water. Maybe you're surfing in a little rip bowl and you want to just do some tight turns in the pocket there, and that wave's offering up some nice sections, but it's a little bit tricky to balance when you are standing up out the back. Perfect board for that day. So definitely get a Hypernut if your local conditions are like that, or you feel like you just want a board that's easy, that is stable, that's going to perform pretty nicely out there. I definitely recommend the Hypernut. Now, who is this board going to suit? So we've spoken a little bit about the conditions. I just want to highlight my weight range and my height and kind of my stats before we get into that, because this is the 7.2 by 28. Now I weigh 85 kilograms, roughly maybe 86 or 87 with a wetsuit and boots on. I'm about 177 centimeters tall, roughly about 5 feet 10 inches tall. This board is probably at the upper limit of my weight range. So if you were a heavier rider, I'd probably suggest stepping up to the 7.4 by 30 inch Hypernut. This board definitely great for riders below that 85 or 80 kilogram range who want something short, want something compact in their quiver and just have a great time out there surfing. Perfect for people around that 65 to 75 kilogram weight range. Then you do step it up into the bigger sizes. So I'm probably on the limit. I'd prefer to ride the 7.2 just because it's smaller. My ability's quite advanced, so I'm able to ride a slightly smaller board. But if your ability is only that intermediate range and you weigh the same as I do, definitely look at getting the 7.4 by 30. If you have some surf experience before. If you don't have surf experience before, you jump on the 8.0 by 31.5, which is a great entry-level board for the Hypernut, or fantastic for riders over that 105 kilogram mark, because a bigger board is going to be more stable. You're going to be able to use your power to really throw that board around as well. So really great board for those heavier riders. So wrapping up this video, I had a great time surfing the Hypernut. Something that kind of took me by surprise because I wasn't expecting to have that much fun riding this board. I have seen them getting around for many, many years, and it just didn't appeal to me riding this style of board. I much prefer to ride maybe a slightly wider board, but still with that more traditional outline to be able to do those rail carves, and that's just the way I like to surf. But this, it opened my eyes up to some possibilities, and also using it in some different conditions or less than ideal conditions, and just having tons of fun out there on the water. That's what really surprised me, and I really hope that you got a lot out of this review. If you are a SUPboarder Pro subscriber, we will be doing a SUPboarder Pro video, a little bit more extra information about this board, and we're going to be speaking about how you should be riding it, but also the pros and cons to owning a Hypernut. If you're not subscribed to SUPboarder Pro, you can do that right now, and you'll be able to get access to that video. But we really want to thank you for tuning in. This is the 7.2 by 28 inch wide Starboard Hypernut. We hope you got a lot out of this review and you learn a lot as well along the way. If you do have any questions, comments, please do drop them below. We'll happily get back to you with our answers. And thank you very much, and we'll see you very soon on another SUPboarder review.